The captain's voice cut across the staging area like a blade meant to draw blood. "Sir, I need you to step back behind the barriers. This area is for invited guests only." The old man in the faded olive jacket did not flinch. His hands, weathered and scarred across the knuckles, remained still at his sides. What the captain did not know, what no one in that Fleet Week crowd could possibly know, was that those hands had once held the life of 3 CIA operatives in a Beirut compound that officially never existed. And in exactly 11 minutes, the captain would be standing at attention with tears streaming down his face, begging forgiveness from a man whose call sign was still whispered with reverence in every SEAL team from Coronado to Virginia Beach. The morning sun blazed over San Diego's Embarcadero waterfront, casting long shadows across the white tents and ceremonial staging areas assembled for Fleet Week. Thousands of spectators had gathered near the USS Midway Museum, families and veterans and active duty personnel crowding behind rope barriers to witness the dedication of a new memorial plaque. It was supposed to be a day of honor, a day of remembrance. Instead, it was about to become something else entirely. Captain Theodore Sterling Ashworth III smoothed the front of his immaculate dress whites and took 3 deliberate steps toward the old man standing near the memorial stage. Ashworth had spent 6 months planning this ceremony. Every detail choreographed, every moment designed to showcase naval excellence to the distinguished guests assembled in the VIP section. Admiral Helena Vance herself was attending, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, and Ashworth intended to make an impression that would fast-track his promotion. Nothing would disrupt his perfect day. Certainly not some vagrant in a disgraceful jacket lurking near the stage like he belonged there. The old man's appearance was an offense to everything the ceremony represented. His jacket hung loose on a frame that had once been powerful but had withered with years of hard living. The olive drab fabric was faded nearly gray, held together at the seams with careful stitching that spoke of someone who could not afford replacement. Patches covered the shoulders, but they were so worn that their original designs had become ghosts of themselves, barely visible beneath decades of weather and wear. His boots were held together with tape. His beard was unkempt. He looked exactly like what Captain Ashworth assumed he was, a homeless man who had wandered past the security perimeter to gawk at a ceremony he had no business attending. "I understand, sir," the old man said. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper, roughened by years of disuse. "Just wanted to see the names before the crowd gets too thick." "The names, sir. That is all." Ashworth's lip curled. "The names? You can see them from the public viewing area like everyone else. We have standards to maintain here. This is a ceremony honoring real heroes, real service members." His voice rose deliberately, ensuring the nearby personnel could hear every word. Not vagrants wearing army surplus store costumes pretending to be something they're not. The old man said nothing. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his posture remained still. When he had been addressed, something shifted in his bearing, a straightening of the spine that was barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. His eyes, pale blue and steady, met the captain's gaze without challenge but without submission either. There was something in those eyes, something that should have given Ashworth pause, something that spoke of distances traveled and prices paid that the captain could not begin to comprehend. But Ashworth was not looking at the old man's eyes. He was looking at the jacket. "Where did you even get that thing?" he demanded, gesturing at the faded fabric with obvious disgust. "A thrift store? A dumpster? Do you have any idea how offensive it is to wear military patches you did not earn? There are men and women here today who actually served, who actually sacrificed, and you have the audacity to show up looking like that?" The old man's hand moved slowly to touch the jacket's collar. His fingers, scarred and calloused, traced the fabric with a gentleness that seemed out of place. "With respect, Captain," he said quietly, "I would prefer not to discuss the jacket." Ashworth laughed. The sound was sharp and theatrical, designed to carry. "Of course you would prefer not to discuss it, because we both know those patches are fake. That jacket is fake. Everything about your pathetic little costume is fake." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss that somehow carried even further. I have seen 100 men like you, claiming service you never gave, wearing symbols you never earned. You disgust me. Around them, the crowd had begun to notice the confrontation. Heads turning, phones appearing in hands. Near the VIP tent, a woman in navy dress uniform paused mid-conversation, her eyes drawn to the scene unfolding near the barriers. Senior Chief Petty Officer Diana Reyes had been coordinating logistics for the ceremony since dawn, but something about the old man near the stage had caught her attention. Not his appearance. Something else. The way he stood when the captain addressed him. The precision of his stillness. She had seen men stand like that before. Men who had been through things that burned away everything soft and left only steel behind. The old man took a single step backward, placing himself behind the rope barrier as the captain had demanded. He moved with an economy of motion that seemed wrong for someone his age, each movement precise and deliberate, wasting nothing. "Yes, sir," he said. "I understand, sir. I will watch from here." Ashworth should have let it end there. He should have claimed his victory and returned to his ceremony. But something about the old man's quiet dignity, his refusal to grovel or apologize, ignited a fury in the captain that demanded satisfaction. He wanted this vagrant to know his place. He wanted witnesses to see him enforce the standards that separated men like himself from men like this. "That jacket," Ashworth said, his voice rising again for the benefit of the growing audience. "Take it off. Right now. You are embarrassing the United States Navy with that ridiculous costume. Take it off, or I will have security remove you from the premises entirely." The old man's hand stilled on the collar. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, so quietly that only Ashworth could hear, "Captain, you do not want to do this." It was not a threat. It was not defiance. It was something else entirely. A warning. An offering of mercy to a man who did not know he needed it. But Captain Theodore Sterling Ashworth III had never learned to recognize mercy when it was offered. And in exactly 8 minutes, he would understand why he should have. The old man stepped back from the barrier, but did not leave. He could not leave. Not today. Not when they were finally going to carve Cisco's name into stone. Earl Vernon Whitmore had walked 4 miles that morning to reach the Embarcadero. His truck had refused to start again, the engine turning over with a death rattle that promised more repairs he could not afford. So he had walked through the pre-dawn darkness of San Diego's streets, past the sleeping storefronts and the other men huddled in doorways, men like himself who had fallen through the cracks of a world that had forgotten them. He had walked because nothing short of death would keep him from the ceremony. 40 years he had waited. 40 years since Beirut. 40 years since he held his brother in his arms and watched the light leave his eyes. Today, Raymond Delgado's name would finally be added to the memorial. Today, after 4 decades of classified silence, Cisco was coming home. Earl had prepared as best he could. He had found a spot behind an abandoned warehouse where he could wash with water from a garden hose. He had put on the cleanest clothes he owned, a flannel shirt with only 2 holes and pants that still held their shape. And he had worn the jacket. He always wore the jacket. It was the only thing he had left that still connected him to the man he used to be. The salt smell of the harbor drifted across the staging area, mixing with diesel fumes from the generators powering the ceremonial lights. Earl breathed it in and felt the years fall away. Suddenly, he was not standing on the Embarcadero. He was standing in the helicopter bay of a USS Guam, October 1986, watching the coast of Lebanon grow larger through the open doors. Cisco beside him, checking his weapon with practiced ease, that familiar grin spreading across his face despite what waited for them below. "You ready, Spectre?" Cisco's voice cut through the rotor noise. "Born ready, Cisco. Always." They had been swim buddies since BUD/S. 2 young men from opposite ends of the country who had found in each other the brother neither had been born with. Cisco was from East Los Angeles, raised by a grandmother who worked 3 jobs to keep him out of the gangs. Earl was from a small town in Montana, the son of a rancher who had served in Korea and never talked about it. They should have had nothing in common. Instead, they had everything. Hell Week had nearly broken them both. Day 4, hypothermic in the surf, muscles screaming, mind shutting down. Earl had been ready to quit, ready to ring the bell and make the pain stop. And Cisco had grabbed his arm, pulled him close, whispered words that Earl would carry for the rest of his life. "Not today, brother. We do not quit today. We quit tomorrow. But never today." They never quit. They made it through together. And for the next 11 years, wherever one went, the other followed. Same team, same missions, same brotherhood forged in salt water and blood. The Beirut mission was supposed to be straightforward. 3 CIA operatives had been captured by a Hezbollah cell operating out of a fortified compound in the southern suburbs. Intelligence suggested a 12-hour window before the operatives would be moved to a location beyond rescue. 12 men went in. Earl was lead breacher. Cisco was point man. First through every door. First to face whatever waited on the other side. The compound was worse than intel suggested. 50 hostiles instead of 20. Reinforced positions. Overlapping fields of fire. They adapted. They always adapted. Cisco moved through that compound like a ghost, clearing rooms with a precision that bordered on supernatural. Earl followed, securing the operatives, calling out targets, trusting his brother to keep him alive. They were 30 seconds from extraction when the shooter appeared. A window they had cleared twice. A hostile playing dead who decided to take one last shot at glory. Earl never saw him, never heard the weapon cycle. He only felt Cisco's body slam into his, driving him sideways, and then the 3 cracks of rifle fire that should have ended his life. Instead, they ended Cisco's. Earl caught him as he fell. The rounds had punched through his vest, shredding the femoral artery. Blood everywhere. Too much blood. Earl's hands pressing against wounds that would not stop flowing, his voice breaking as he screamed for the medic, for extraction, for God himself to intervene. Cisco's hand found his. Weak, trembling, but still reaching. "Get them home, Spectre." His voice was already fading. "Promise me. Get them home. I'm already there." 90 seconds. That was all the time Earl had. 90 seconds to hold his brother, to tell him he loved him, to watch the life drain from eyes that had always sparkled with mischief and joy. 90 seconds that had stretched into an eternity Earl had never escaped. He carried Cisco's body to the helicopter himself, would not let anyone else touch him, would not let go until they pried his fingers loose at the field hospital, until someone pressed a needle into his arm and the world finally went dark. The smell of diesel faded, and Earl was back on the Embarcadero. His hand had moved without conscious thought to the photograph in his pocket. He pulled it out now, edges worn soft from years of handling. 2 faces smiled up at him. Marilyn, his wife of 41 years, her hair silver in the photograph, but her smile unchanged from the day he met her at a USO dance in 1978. And Celia, their daughter, wearing her medical school graduation gown, pride radiating from every feature. The photograph was 9 years old, taken before Marilyn got sick, before the diagnosis that gave her 6 months and took her in 4. Before Earl watched another person he loved slip away, while he held on with everything he had, and it still was not enough. If you're watching this story from anywhere in the world, from any corner of this country or beyond, we would love to know where you're joining us from today. Drop a comment below and tell us your city, your town, your story. Because hidden heroes like the one in this story exist everywhere. In every community, on every street. You might pass them every day without knowing what they carry, what they have sacrificed, what secrets live behind their quiet eyes. And if stories like this one speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more of these incredible, true accounts of courage and redemption. Marilyn had understood about the jacket. She never asked him to take it off, never complained about the faded fabric or the patches that marked him as something other than the insurance adjuster he had become in civilian life. She understood that some wounds never heal, that some brothers never leave, that Cisco's blood in the collar of that jacket was the closest thing to a grave Earl could visit. And when she died, when the cancer finally took her, Earl had shattered completely. He looked at Celia and saw Marilyn's eyes staring back. He looked at their home and saw 41 years of memories he could not bear to face. So he wrote a note. 3 lines. I love you. I am sorry. Do not look for me. And then he disappeared. For years now. For years of living in his truck when the engine worked and under the Coronado Bridge when it did not. For years of visiting the Seal Memorial every dawn, touching the names of brothers who had gone before, waiting for the day when Cisco would finally join them. That day was today. Earl tucked the photograph back into his pocket and fixed his eyes on the covered memorial plaque near the stage. His brother's name was under that cloth. 40 years too late, but finally there. He was not leaving until he saw it. Captain Ashworth was not finished. The old man's quiet compliance had done nothing to satisfy the fury building in his chest. If anything, the vagrant's dignity made it worse. Made Ashworth feel like he was somehow losing a contest he had not agreed to enter. He needed this man to grovel. He needed witnesses to see the clear distinction between those who belonged at this ceremony and those who did not. He turned to the 2 security personnel flanking him and raised his voice loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. Keep an eye on this individual. If he takes 1 step past those barriers, I want him removed from the premises immediately. And someone find out how he got past the perimeter in the first place. This is exactly the kind of security failure that embarrasses the entire Navy. The security guards exchanged glances but moved to comply. Neither of them looked comfortable with the situation. The old man had done nothing aggressive, had not raised his voice, had not made any threatening movements. He had simply asked to see the names on a memorial, and now he stood behind the barriers exactly as instructed, still and silent as a statue. But Captain Ashworth was already moving on to his next target. He spotted Senior Chief Reyes approaching from the VIP area and intercepted her before she could reach the barriers. Senior Chief, I want a full report on how that vagrant breached our security perimeter. This is completely unacceptable. Reyes hesitated. Her eyes kept drifting past the captain to the old man, standing alone behind the rope line. Sir, I do not believe he breached anything. The public viewing areas are open to everyone. He appears to be standing exactly where he is supposed to be. Ashworth's face reddened. Are you defending him, Senior Chief? No, sir. I'm simply stating the facts of the situation. He has not violated any protocols that I am aware of. The captain stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. Look at him. Look at that ridiculous jacket. Those fake patches. He is an embarrassment to everyone here who actually earned the right to wear a uniform. I want him gone. Find a reason, or I will find one myself. Reyes stiffened. Sir, with respect, I really think you should look more closely at his jacket before you proceed any further. Something in her tone made Ashworth pause. What are you talking about? The patches, sir. They are faded, but they are not fake. I have seen insignia like that before. The trident on his shoulder. And there is something else. Numbers stitched beneath it. Coordinates, I think. Ashworth laughed dismissively. Coordinates? Of course. Let me guess, the location of some imaginary battle he fought in his imagination. He turned back toward the barriers, his voice rising again for the benefit of the crowd. These homeless veterans, they all have the same story. Secret missions, classified operations, heroic sacrifices that conveniently cannot be verified. It is pathetic. Behind the barriers, Earl Whitmore heard every word. His jaw tightened. His hands remained still at his sides, but something shifted in his posture. A straightening that was almost imperceptible. An alignment of spine and shoulders that spoke of decades of training, of muscle memory that never faded no matter how far man fell. Senior Chief Reyes saw it. She had spent 15 years working alongside SEAL operators, coordinating logistics for missions that would never appear in any official record. She knew how these men moved, how they carried themselves, the stillness that was not passivity but coiled readiness. And she knew, with growing certainty, that the old man behind the barriers was not what Captain Ashworth assumed him to be. She also knew those coordinates. She had seen them before, stitched into a memorial flag hanging on a wall at Dam Neck, Virginia. The wall where DevGru honored operators who had given everything on missions the public would never know about. 33.8938 North, 35.501 8 East. Beirut, 1986. an extraction operation that had been classified for nearly 40 years. Her heart began to pound. In the crowd near the barriers, another set of eyes had fixed on the confrontation. Frank Castellano was 72 years old, a retired Master Chief who had served with SEAL Team 4 from 1979 to 1995. He had come to the ceremony to honor fallen brothers, to see names added to a memorial that grew longer every year. He had not expected to see a ghost, but the old man in the faded jacket was unmistakable. Not his face, which had aged beyond easy recognition. Not his body, which had withered from the powerful frame Frank remembered. It was the way he stood, the way he absorbed the captain's insults without flinching. The absolute stillness that Frank had seen only in men who had passed through the crucible of special operations and emerged as something more than human. And the jacket. Frank could not see the patches clearly from this distance, but he could see enough. The shape of a trident on the shoulder. The outline of something else beneath it. Something that made his blood run cold. He began pushing through the crowd toward the barriers. Captain Ashworth had returned to his position near the old man, emboldened by what he perceived as a successful assertion of dominance. The vagrant had not left, but he had been put in his place. The crowd had witnessed the captain defending the integrity of the ceremony. That would play well with Admiral Vance. But Ashworth was not satisfied. The old man's continued presence felt like defiance. His quiet dignity felt like mockery. And those patches, fake as they surely were, felt like a personal insult to everyone who had actually earned the right to wear them. "You know what really disgusts me?" Ashworth said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "It is not just the stolen valor. It is the arrogance, the assumption that you can put on a costume and suddenly you are one of us. That you can wear patches you never earned and expect people to believe you actually served." He stepped closer to the barrier, close enough that Earl could smell the aftershave on his skin. "You want to know the difference between you and the men we are honoring today? They gave something. They sacrificed something. They earned every patch, every medal, every moment of recognition. And you?" He gestured at Earl's jacket with contempt. "You're just a parasite, feeding off their glory, pretending to be something you could never be." Earl's voice was quiet. "Captain, I did not come here to cause trouble. I came to see a name on that memorial. A man who died 40 years ago. That is all I want." Ashworth laughed. "A name? Let me guess, your imaginary war buddy from your imaginary missions. What was his name? John Smith? James Bond? Raymond Delgado?" Earl's voice did not waver. His friends called him Cisco. "He was my brother." For a moment, something flickered across Ashworth's face. The name was familiar. Raymond Delgado was one of the names being added to the memorial today. One of the recently declassified casualties whose service records had finally been released after decades of secrecy. But the flicker passed. Ashworth's certainty reasserted itself. "Of course you know the name. You probably read it in the ceremony program. Memorized it so you could pretend you had some connection." His voice dripped with contempt. Pathetic. From the crowd, Frank Castellano had almost reached the barrier. His eyes were locked on the old man's jacket, on the patches, on the coordinates he could now see clearly stitched beneath the faded trident. His hand began to shake, because he knew those coordinates. He had been there, third man through the breach. He had watched the point man take 3 rounds meant for the lead breacher. He had helped carry the body to the helicopter, and he knew exactly who the lead breacher had been. His voice cracked as he called out across the barrier. "Spectre, is that you?" The name hung in the air like a ghost made of sound. "Spectre." Earl turned slowly toward the voice, and for a moment the years fell away from both men. Frank Castellano stood at the barrier, his weathered face pale, his hand gripping the rope like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Earl's voice was barely a whisper. "Frankie?" Captain Ashworth looked between the two men with irritation. "You know this vagrant?" Frank did not even glance at the captain. His eyes were locked on Earl, on the jacket, on the faded patches that told a story most people would never be allowed to read. "Know him?" His voice cracked. "I served with him. Beirut. 86. I was third man through the breach." Ashworth laughed, but the sound was uncertain now. "Of course you were. Let me guess, You were both secret agents on a classified mission that conveniently cannot be verified. Frank finally turned to face the captain, and something in his expression made Ashworth take an involuntary step backward. I was there, Captain. I watched this man carry his dying brother to the extraction helicopter while 3 hostiles were still shooting at us. I watched him hold Cisco Delgado in his arms while he bled out. And I watched him refuse to let go until they sedated him at the field hospital. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a growl. So do not stand there in your pretty white uniform and tell me what I did or did not see. The confrontation had drawn more attention now. Phones were recording from multiple angles. Near the VIP tent, Admiral Helena Vance had risen from her seat, her eyes narrowing as she observed the commotion near the barriers. Her aide leaned in to whisper something, but she waved him off. Something about the scene demanded her attention. Earl reached out and touched Frank's arm. "It's all right, Frankie. Let go. I did not come here for this." Frank shook his head. No, it is not all right." He turned back to Ashworth, jabbing a finger toward Earl's jacket. "Do you see those coordinates stitched onto the trident? 33.8938 north, 35.501 east. That is Beirut, Captain. That is the compound where we extracted 3 CIA operatives from a Hezbollah cell. That is where Petty Officer First Class Raymond Delgado died, saving this man's life. And those initials beneath the coordinates RCD, that is Cisco's blood still soaked into the collar of that jacket, because Spectre has never washed it. Not once in 40 years. Ashworth's face had gone pale, but his pride would not let him retreat. Anyone could stitch coordinates into a jacket. Anyone could make up a story about classified missions. That does not prove anything. Earl's hand moved to his chest, to the dog tags hanging beneath his shirt. His fingers closed around the worn metal. He had not intended to do this. He had come only to see Cisco's name, to say goodbye, to finally let his brother rest. But some accusations could not go unanswered. Some insults cut too deep to ignore. He pulled the dog tags free. 2 sets, his own, and another pair so worn that the stamped letters were barely legible. He held them out toward the light, and his voice, when it came, had changed. The softness was gone. In its place was something cold, something precise, something that had commanded men in the darkest places on Earth. These tags belonged to Raymond Cisco Delgado. His voice carried across the silent crowd. Petty Officer First Class, SEAL Team 6, blood type O positive, Catholic. He died on October 23, 1986, at approximately 0347 local time, in a helicopter over Beirut. Cause of death was catastrophic blood loss from 3 rifle rounds to the lower abdomen and right thigh. The rounds severed his femoral artery. He bled out in 90 seconds. Earl's eyes met Ashworth's, and the captain found he could not look away. I know, because I was holding him. I know because his blood soaked through my jacket, and I have never been able to wash it out. I know because his last words were "Get them home. Spectre, I am already there." And I have carried those words, and these tags, and that blood for 40 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the harbor breeze seemed to still. Frank Castellano wiped tears from his face with the back of his hand. He remembered that night, the chaos of the extraction, the sound of Cisco's breathing getting weaker, the way Earl had refused to let anyone else touch the body, had carried his brother off the helicopter himself, even though his own wounds had left trails of blood across the deck. Earl's voice softened again, the steel retreating back beneath the surface. "I did not come here to prove anything to you, Captain. I did not come here to cause trouble or embarrass anyone. I came because today, for the first time in 40 years, my brother's name is being added to that memorial. His service was classified until last year. His sacrifice was buried in files that nobody was allowed to read. And today, finally, he gets to come home." He tucked the dog tags back beneath his shirt, his hand lingering over them for a moment. "That is all I want, to see his name, to say goodbye, and then I will leave, and you will never see me again." Ashworth stood frozen. His certainty had cracked, but his pride still held the pieces together. He could not admit he was wrong. could not acknowledge that he had spent the last 15 minutes publicly humiliating a man who might actually be what he claimed. The political calculation was already running through his mind. If he backed down now, in front of all these witnesses, his career would be finished. But if this vagrant was lying, if this was all an elaborate performance, then Ashworth could still salvage the situation. He made his choice. "That is a touching story," he said, and his voice was steadier than he felt. "But stories are easy. Anyone can memorize dates and coordinates. Anyone can buy dog tags at a surplus store and have them engraved. If you are who you claim to be, you can prove it through official channels. Until then, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Frank Castellano stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. "You arrogant son of a—" Earl's hand caught his arm. "Frankie." "No." The older veteran turned to him, disbelief in his eyes. "You're just going to let him talk to you like that? After everything you did? After everything you sacrificed?" Earl's expression was calm, almost peaceful. "I stopped caring what men like him think of me a long time ago, Frankie. The only opinion that matters belongs to men who are not here anymore." His hand touched the dog tags beneath his shirt. "And Cisco knows the truth. That is enough." But Frank was not the only one watching. Senior Chief Reyes had moved closer during the confrontation, her phone in her hand, her face pale. She had been running searches while Earl spoke, cross-referencing dates and coordinates with declassified operation files. And what she had found had made her blood run cold. Because the man standing behind those barriers was not just a SEAL operator. He was not just a veteran with a distinguished service record. He was a legend. And in approximately 4 minutes, Admiral Helena Vance was going to confirm it. Captain Ashworth felt the ground shifting beneath him, but refused to acknowledge it. He turned to his security detail with renewed authority. "I want this individual escorted off the premises immediately. He is disrupting an official Navy ceremony and making unverifiable claims about classified military service. That is grounds for removal." The 2 security guards hesitated. They had heard everything. The coordinates, the dog tags, the testimony of a man who claimed to have served alongside the vagrant in Beirut. One of them, a young petty officer named Ruiz, had a grandfather who had served in Vietnam. He had grown up hearing stories about men who came home broken, who fell through the cracks, who ended up on streets and under bridges while the country they served forgot they existed. "Sir," Ruiz said carefully, "maybe we should wait for confirmation before we proceed. If this man is telling the truth—" "He is not telling the truth," Ashworth snapped. "Look at him. Does he look like a decorated SEAL operator to you? Does he look like someone who conducted classified missions for the United States government? He is a homeless vagrant who memorized some details from the ceremony program and constructed an elaborate fantasy. I have seen it 100 times." From behind the barrier, Earl spoke quietly. "You have never seen anything like me, Captain." The words were not a boast. They were not a challenge. They were simply a statement of fact, delivered with the calm certainty of a man who had long ago stopped needing anyone else's validation. And something in that certainty, something in the absolute stillness of the old man's bearing, made Captain Ashworth's stomach clench with the first real doubt he had felt since the confrontation began. Senior Chief Reyes pushed through the crowd, her phone clutched in her hand, her face ashen. "Captain Ashworth." "Sir, I need to speak with you immediately." "Not now, Senior Chief. I am handling this situation." "Sir, with respect, you need to see this." Her voice was urgent, almost desperate. "I ran the coordinates through the declassified operations database. The one stitched into his jacket. 33.8938 north, 35.5018 east." She held up her phone, the screen displaying an official Navy document marked with the recently removed classification headers. Operation Silent Harbor, October 1986. Extraction of 3 CIA operatives from a Hezbollah compound in Beirut. 12-man SEAL team. For casualties. And sir, the lead breacher on that mission, the man who carried out the primary extraction while under fire, was a petty officer named Earl Whitmore. Call sign Spectre. Ashworth stared at the phone. The words on the screen seemed to blur and shift, refusing to arrange themselves into any pattern that made sense. That is impossible. This man cannot be. There is more, sir. Reyes scrolled down, her hand trembling. Earl Whitmore went on to become one of the most decorated operators in Devgar history. Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, 3 awards. And in 2015, when certain operations were finally declassified, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in a private ceremony at the White House. She looked up from the phone, her eyes meeting Ashworth's. Sir, this man is not a vagrant pretending to be a hero. He is a legend. The word hung in the air. Legend. Ashworth's mouth opened, but no sound came out. From the VIP area, a new voice cut through the tension. What is happening here? Admiral Helena Vance strode through the crowd, her aides scrambling to keep up. The spectators parted before her like water before the bow of a ship. She was a compact woman, barely 5'4", but she carried herself with an authority that made her seem 10 feet tall. As the first female commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, she had spent her entire career proving that competence mattered more than appearance. And she had zero tolerance for officers who judged books by their covers. Captain Ashworth snapped to attention so fast his spine cracked. Admiral, Mom, I was just handling a security situation. This individual was disrupting the ceremony and making false claims about military service. Vance's eyes moved past Ashworth to the old man standing behind the barrier. She took in the faded jacket, the worn patches, the trident on the shoulder, and beneath it, the coordinates that had been seared into her memory since childhood. Her father had served in Panama in 1989. Operation Just Cause. He had been a young lieutenant then, green and terrified, leading his first combat mission. And when everything went wrong, when his unit was pinned down and taking casualties, a single operator had appeared out of the darkness like a ghost, had held a defensive position for 19 hours while calling in air support, had saved the lives of every man in her father's unit. Her father had told her the story 100 times. The call sign, he whispered like a prayer. The man who moved through combat like death itself, unstoppable and inevitable. The legend who had vanished into the shadows when a mission was complete and never sought recognition or reward. Spectre. Admiral Vance stepped past Captain Ashworth without acknowledging him. She approached the barrier slowly, her eyes fixed on Earl's face. He had aged. The powerful frame she had seen in photographs had withered. The sharp features had softened with time and hardship. But the eyes were the same, pale blue, steady, carrying depths that most people could never fathom. She stopped at the barrier. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely above a whisper. My father told me about Panama, about the 19 hours, about the man who saved his entire unit and then disappeared before anyone could thank him. She paused, her composure cracking for just a moment. He said you were the finest operator he ever served with. He said you were a ghost who saved more lives than anyone would ever know. Earl's expression shifted. Something softened behind his eyes. Your father was Lieutenant James Vance. Good man, good officer. Kept his head when everything was falling apart. He looked at her, really looked, and a faint smile crossed his weathered face. You have his eyes. Admiral Vance blinked back tears. She had not cried in uniform in 20 years. She would not start now, but her voice trembled when she spoke again. The coordinates on your jacket. 33.8938 north, 35.5018 east. Earl nodded slowly. Beirut, October 23, 1986. The compound where Cisco died. Vance closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were hard as steel. She turned to face Captain Ashworth, who stood frozen at attention, his face the color of old milk. Captain, she said, and her voice could have frozen the harbor. Do you have any idea what you have done? Captain Ashworth's mouth moved, but no words emerged. His mind raced through possibilities, searching for some way to salvage the situation, some explanation that would make sense of what was happening. Admiral, he finally managed, I had no way of knowing. He looked like a vagrant. He was wearing a torn jacket and standing in a restricted area. I was simply maintaining security protocols. Admiral Vance's expression did not change. Security protocols. She turned back toward Earl, her gaze moving slowly down the faded jacket. Tell me, Captain, did your security protocols include examining his jacket before you publicly humiliated him in front of hundreds of witnesses? Ashworth swallowed hard. The patches were faded. I cannot see them clearly. You did not try to see them clearly. Vance's voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than any shout. You saw a homeless man, and you decided he did not belong here. You decided he could not possibly be what he claimed. You judged him by his appearance, and you were wrong. Her eyes locked onto his. Do you understand how wrong you were? From behind the barrier, Earl spoke softly. Admiral, it does not matter. I did not come here for recognition or vindication. I can see a name on a memorial. That is all. Vance turned back to him. Master Chief Whitmore, with respect, it matters. It matters because men like you gave everything for this country, and you deserve better than to be mocked by officers who have never heard a shot fired in anger. She glanced at Ashworth with barely concealed contempt. It matters because there are thousands of veterans on the streets right now, and if this is how we treat them, we have failed every principle we claim to defend. The crowd had grown silent. Phones continued to record from every angle. Near the back of the gathering, a woman in civilian clothes pushed forward, drawn by the commotion. She had dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that held the permanent exhaustion of someone who spent her life in emergency rooms, fighting to save lives that others had given up on. Dr. Celia Whitmore Nakamura had come to Fleet Week to honor her father's legacy, to see the name of his fallen brother added to the memorial, to feel some connection to the man who had vanished from her life 4 years ago. She did not yet know he was 50 feet away. Admiral Vance gestured to her aide. Lieutenant, please escort Master Chief Whitmore to the VIP section. He will be seated as an honored guest for the remainder of the ceremony. Earl shook his head slowly. That is not necessary, Admiral. I am fine where I am. It is not a request, Master Chief. Vance's voice softened. You served this country with distinction for over 2 decades. You saved lives that will never know your name. The least we can do is give you a chair and a clear view of the memorial when your brother's name is unveiled. Earl hesitated. His hand moved unconsciously to touch the dog tag beneath his shirt. For 40 years, he had avoided attention, avoided recognition, avoided anything that might force him to confront the man he used to be and the wreckage he had become. Standing in the VIP section, surrounded by admirals and dignitaries, felt like a violation of everything he had built his invisible life around. But Cisco's name was on that memorial, and maybe just this once he could stand in the light long enough to say goodbye. All right, he said quietly. For Cisco. Vance nodded and turned back to Ashworth. Captain, you will remain at your post for the duration of the ceremony. Afterward, you will report to my office for a full debriefing on your conduct here today. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Your performance evaluation is hereby under formal review. Ashworth's face went gray. Admiral, please. My career, your career, Vance interrupted, is not my primary concern at this moment. My primary concern is ensuring that this ceremony honors the men and women it was designed to honor, including the man you just spent 20 minutes trying to humiliate and remove. She turned away from him, dismissing him completely. We will discuss your future later. The security barrier was lifted, and Earl stepped through into the staging area. The crowd parted around him, faces shifting from curiosity to recognition to something that looked almost like awe. Word was spreading through the assembly. Whispered conversations carried fragments of his story. Beirut, Panama, Devgru, legend. Frank Castellano fell in a step beside him, tears still wet on his weathered cheeks. I cannot believe it is really you, Spectre. After all these years. I thought you were dead. Earl's voice was quiet. There were days I wished I was. Frankie, the older veteran, gripped his arm. What happened to you? After you retired, you just vanished. Nobody knew where you went. Nobody could find you. Earl did not answer immediately. His eyes had drifted across the crowd, scanning faces without conscious thought, a habit that decades of retirement had never erased. Life happened, Frankie. My wife died. I could not handle it. I ran. Frank's grip tightened. "I am sorry, Earl. I did not know. Nobody knew. That was the point." They reached the VIP section, where rows of white chairs faced the covered memorial. Admiral Vance directed Earl to a seat in the front row, directly in front of the shrouded plaques. Dignitaries and senior officers watched him pass, some with curiosity, others with dawning recognition. A retired rear admiral in the second row leaned over to whisper to his companion, and Earl heard fragments of the conversation. "That is him, the one from Beirut. Spectre." Earl settled into the chair, the unfamiliar comfort of the cushioned seat strange against his back. He had spent so many years on concrete and cardboard that softness felt almost painful. His hand found the dog tags again, fingers tracing the worn letters of Cisco's name. "Soon, brother," he whispered. "Soon you will be home." Behind him, in the crowd beyond the VIP barriers, Dr. Celia Whitmore Nakamura was pushing closer. Something about the commotion had caught her attention. Something about the old man being escorted to the front row. She could not see his face from this angle. Only his back, the faded jacket, the way he moved with a careful precision that seemed familiar in a way she could not quite place. Her heart began to beat faster, though she did not understand why. And on the stage, the ceremony coordinator checked his watch and signaled to the honor guard. In 3 minutes, the memorial would be unveiled. In 3 minutes, Raymond Cisco Delgado's name would finally be carved in stone for all the world to see. In 3 minutes, everything Earl Whitmore had been running for would finally catch up with him. Earl could have left. Even now, seated in the front row of the VIP section with Admiral Vance 2 chairs away, he could have slipped out, found a gap in the crowd, disappeared back into the invisible life he had constructed so carefully over the past 4 years. He had done it before. He was good at vanishing. It was in some ways the only skill he had left. But Cisco's name was under that shroud. 40 years of waiting. 40 years of visiting memorials where his brother's sacrifice was absent, classified into non-existence by men in Washington who had never held a dying friend in their arms. Today, finally, Cisco would be acknowledged. Today, his name would join the others who had given everything. Earl owed him that much. He owed him the witness of someone who remembered. His hand slipped into his pocket and found the photograph. He did not pull it out, not here in front of all these people, but his fingers traced the worn edges like a rosary. Marilyn's smile, Celia's pride, the last image of the family he had abandoned. He had thought about them every day for 4 years, had tracked their lives from a distance, gathering fragments of information like a man dying of thirst gathering drops of rain. He knew Celia had been promoted to head of emergency medicine at UCSD Medical Center. Knew she had married a good man, a pediatric surgeon named David Nakamura, 3 years after Earl left. Knew they had a daughter now, a 6-year-old named Grace who had Marilyn's eyes. He knew all of this because he watched. Because even in his exile, even in his self-imposed punishment, he could not stop loving them. Could not stop needing to know they were okay. But he had never reached out, never called, never written, because he believed, with the absolute certainty of a broken man, that his presence would only hurt them, that the father and grandfather they deserved was not the hollow shell he had become, that the kindest thing he could do was stay away and let them build lives untainted by his failure. The ceremony coordinator stepped to the podium and began speaking. Earl heard the words as if from a great distance. Honored guests, sacred duty, ultimate sacrifice, the language of memorial services, familiar from too many funerals, too many folded flags, too many brothers lowered into the ground. His eyes fixed on the shrouded plaques. Soon he would see Cisco's name. Soon he could say goodbye. In the crowd behind the VIP section, Celia had pushed her way to the front of the public viewing area. She still could not see the old man's face, but something about him would not let her look away. The set of his shoulders, the slight tilt of his head, the way his hand kept moving to touch something at his chest. Her father used to do that, used to touch his dog tags when he was thinking, when he was remembering, when the weight of the past pressed down too heavily to bear alone. Stop it, she told herself. You're seeing ghosts. He's gone. He's been gone for 4 years. You have to accept it. but she could not look away. On the stage, the coordinator was reading the names of the fallen being added to the memorial. Each name followed by rank, unit, date of death. Each name a universe of loss compressed into a few syllables. The honor guards stood at attention, rifles held in perfect formation, faces carved from stone. And then the coordinator spoke the name Earl had been waiting 40 years to hear. Petty Officer First Class Raymond Delgado. SEAL Team 6. October 23, 1986. Earl's breath caught. His fingers tightened on the photograph in his pocket. Cisco. Finally. After all this time, the coordinator continued. Petty Officer Delgado gave his life during a classified extraction operation in Beirut, Lebanon. He was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in the face of enemy action. His sacrifice saved the lives of 3 American intelligence operatives and multiple members of his SEAL team. Earl closed his eyes. The helicopter, the blood, the 90 seconds that had stretched into eternity. Cisco's hand in his, growing weaker. The last words he had carried for 4 decades. Get them home, Spectre. I'm already there. I got them home, brother, Earl whispered. Every one of them, just like I promised. The honor guard moved forward to unveil the memorial plaques. The shroud fell away, revealing polished granite carved with names and dates. And there, near the bottom of the newest editions, Earl saw it. Raymond C. Delgado. The letters catching the sunlight. Belmano. Undeniable. Real. Tears streamed down Earl's face. He did not try to hide them. Did not try to maintain the stoic composure that had carried him through decades of missions and losses and grief. This moment was not about composure. This moment was about a promise kept, a brother honored, a debt finally paid. He stood slowly from his chair. Admiral Vance glanced at him, but said nothing. The crowd watched as the old man in the faded jacket walked toward the memorial, his steps measured and precise despite the tears blurring his vision. He stopped in front of the granite slab and raised his hand in a salute that had lost none of its crispness despite years of disuse. The VIP section rose to their feet, then the crowd behind them. One by one, civilians and veterans and active duty personnel standing in silent tribute as the legend they had only just learned was among them honored his fallen brother. Earl held the salute for a long moment. Then his hand dropped, and he pressed his palm flat against the cold granite, against the carved letters of Cisco's name. Still here, brother, he said, his voice breaking. Still trying. And now, finally, you are home. Behind him, in the crowd, a woman's voice cut through the silence. A single word, cracked with disbelief and desperate hope. Dad? Earl froze, his hands still pressed against the granite, his heart stopping in his chest. He knew that voice, had heard it in his dreams every night for 4 years, had replayed every conversation, every laugh, every argument, every moment of connection that he had thrown away when he walked out the door. Celia. He turned slowly, afraid that if he moved too fast, the illusion would shatter, afraid that his broken mind had finally conjured the one thing he wanted most and could never have. But it was not an illusion. She was there, pushing through the crowd, her face streaked with tears, her eyes locked on his with an expression that held rage and grief and love and desperate, desperate hope. Dad? Her voice broke on the word. Is that really you? The world had stopped. The crowd, the ceremony, the admirals and dignitaries, all of it faded into meaningless background noise. There was only Celia, only her face, older than the photograph he carried, but unmistakable. Only her eyes, Marilyn's eyes, filled with tears and something that looked like fury and something that looked like hope. Earl's voice came out as a whisper. Celia, I was not going to bother you. I swear. I just wanted to see Cisco's name. I was going to leave before anyone noticed. Bother me? The word exploded out of her, raw with 4 years of grief and rage and desperate searching. Bother me? She pushed past the barrier rope, ignoring the security guard who moved to stop her. Admiral Vance raised a hand, and the guard stepped back. Celia crossed the distance between them in seconds, stopping just feet from her father, her whole body trembling. We have been looking for you for 4 years, she said. For years, Dad. I hired private investigators. I called every VA hospital in California. I walked through homeless camps with your photograph, asking if anyone had seen you. Her voice cracked. I thought you were dead. I was ready to give up. I came here today to honor you, to honor Cisco, to try to find some kind of closure. And you were here. You were here the whole time. Earl could not speak. His throat had closed around a grief so vast it threatened to swallow him whole. He had known, abstractly, that his disappearance would hurt her. But he had convinced himself it was for the best, that she was better off without him, that his absence was a gift. Looking at her now, seeing the devastation carved into her features, he understood how wrong he had been. I am sorry, he managed. The words felt impossibly small against the weight of what he had done. Celia, I am so sorry. After your mother died, I could not function. I looked at you, and I saw her face, and I could not breathe. I thought if I left, if I just disappeared, you could move on. You could build a life without me dragging you down. Celia stared at him. The fury in her eyes warred with something else, something softer that she was fighting to suppress. You thought leaving would help me move on? You thought abandoning your daughter after her mother died was a gift? Her voice rose. I lost Mom. And then 3 months later, I lost you too. I had to grieve both of you at the same time. Do you have any idea what that was like? Earl's legs felt weak. He wanted to sit down, to collapse, to let the earth swallow him. But he forced himself to stay standing, to face his daughter, to accept whatever she needed to say. I was not thinking clearly, he said. I know that is not an excuse. I know nothing can excuse what I did. But after your mother, after watching her slip away the same way I watched Cisco slip away, something inside me broke. I convinced myself that I was poison, that everyone I loved died, that the only way to protect you was to stay away. Celia's face contorted. Protect me? She took a step closer, close enough that he could see the silver threads in her dark hair, the lines around her eyes that had not been there 4 years ago. You did not protect me, Dad. You shattered me. I spent 2 years in therapy trying to understand why my father, the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my homework and walked me down the aisle at my wedding, would just vanish without a word. The crowd around them had gone completely silent. Thousands of people witnessing the most private moment of Earl's life, but he could not bring himself to care. Let them watch. Let them see what he had done. Let them understand that the legend they had been whispering about was also a coward who had abandoned his only child. I was wrong, Earl said. His voice was steady now, the cold precision of his military training returning even as his heart shattered. I was broken, and I was selfish, and I was wrong. I told myself I was protecting you, but the truth is I was running from grief, running from memories, running from a life that reminded me of everything I had lost. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. The edges worn soft, the images faded from years of handling. Marilyn and Celia, frozen in a moment of joy that felt like another lifetime. I carried this every day, he said, holding it out to her. Every single day for 4 years. I never stopped loving you, Celia. I never stopped thinking about you. I just convinced myself that my love was a curse, that everyone I cared about ended up dying, and the only way to keep you safe was to stay away. Celia looked at the photograph. Her hand rose, trembling, and took it from his fingers. She stared at the image of herself and her mother, at the evidence of her father's secret devotion, and something in her expression shifted. You watched us, she said slowly. You knew about my promotion. You knew about Grace. Earl nodded. I cannot stop. I needed to know you were okay, that you were happy, that you had built a good life without me. Celia's eyes met his. The fury was still there, but it was no longer alone. Beneath it, breaking through like sunlight through storm clouds, was something else, something that looked almost like understanding. I'm not okay, Dad. I have not been okay since you left. She stepped closer, close enough to touch. But I am still here, and so are you. She reached out and grabbed the lapel of his faded jacket, the fabric that still held Cisco's blood, the patches that marked him as something most people would never understand. She gripped it tight, her knuckles white, her whole body shaking. You do not get to disappear again, she said. Her voice was fierce, trembling, absolute. You do not get to decide that we are better off without you. You do not get to make that choice for us. Do you understand me? Earl's vision blurred with tears. I understand. Good. Her grip on his jacket did not loosen. Because I did not spend 4 years searching for a ghost just to let him slip away again. You're coming home, Dad, whether you think you deserve it or not. The word hit him like a physical blow. Home, a concept that had become abstract, meaningless, a memory of something that belonged to someone else. He had not had a home in 4 years, had not believed he deserved one. But his daughter was standing in front of him, gripping his jacket like she would never let go, telling him that she had been searching for him, that she wanted him back. That home was still possible. Celia, he whispered, I do not know if I can. You can, she said. Her voice broke, and suddenly the fierce warrior crumbled, and she was just a daughter who had lost her father and found him again. You could because I need you to, because Grace needs a grandfather, because I cannot lose you again, Dad. I cannot. She released his jacket and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder, her body heaving with sobs. And Earl, the legend, the ghost, the man who had survived things that would have destroyed lesser souls, finally broke completely. He wrapped his arms around his daughter and held on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had been spinning out of control for 4 years. He held on and he wept, tears soaking in her hair, his whole body shaking with grief and relief and something that felt terrifyingly like hope. I am sorry, he said, the words muffled against her shoulder. I am so sorry. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you. I promise. Celia pulled back just enough to look at his face. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with tears, but she was smiling. A fragile, trembling smile that held more love than Earl had ever deserved. You better, she said. And then she hugged him again, and the crowd that had been holding its breath finally released it in a collective sigh. The embrace lasted longer than either of them could measure. Time had become meaningless, suspended in a moment that 4 years of grief had been building toward. When Celia finally pulled back, her hand remained locked around her father's arm, as if releasing him might cause him to vanish again. Admiral Vance approached slowly, giving them space, but unable to remain a silent observer any longer. The ceremony had effectively stopped. The honor guard stood frozen at attention. The crowd watched in hushed reverence as the drama unfolded before them. Master Chief Whitmore, Vance said softly, I believe introductions are in order. Earl wiped his face with the back of his hand, the gesture rough and practical, a soldier's way of handling tears. Admiral, this is my daughter, Dr. Celia Whitmore Nakamura. He paused, his voice catching. I have not seen her in 4 years. Vance extended her hand to Celia. Dr. Whitmore Nakamura, your father is one of the most distinguished operators in the history of naval special warfare. I hope you understand that what happened here today, the way Captain Ashworth treated him, does not represent the values of this organization. Celia shook the Admiral's hand, but her eyes never left her father. With respect, Admiral, I do not care about Captain Ashworth. I do not care about ceremonies or medals or classified operations. I just want my father back. Vance nodded slowly. Of course. She turned to her aide. Lieutenant, please ensure that Master Chief Whitmore and his daughter have whatever privacy and support they need. Cancel my remaining obligations for the afternoon. The aide's eyes widened. Admiral, the reception with Senator Morrison can wait, Vance said firmly. Some things are more important than politics. From behind them, a voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. Captain Ashworth had not moved from his position near the barriers. His face was gray, his posture rigid, but something in his expression had shifted. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like horror as the full weight of what he had done settled onto his shoulders. Admiral Vance. His voice cracked. I need to say something. Vance turned, her expression cold. Captain, I believe I instructed you to remain at your post until the ceremony concluded. Yes, ma'am, but I need to. He stopped, swallowed hard, and forced himself to continue. I need to apologize. To Master Chief Whitmore. Publicly. Now, the crowd shifted attention turning to the captain who had spent the past hour publicly humiliating the man, now revealed as a legend. Ashworth walked forward, each step visibly difficult, until he stood before Earl and Celia. Master Chief Whitmore. His voice trembled. I was wrong. I looked at you, and I saw what I expected to see. A homeless man. A vagrant. Someone who did not belong. I did not look closer. I did not ask questions. I just assumed. He paused, his composure cracking. I accused you of stolen valor. I mocked your jacket. I tried to have you removed from a ceremony honoring your own brother. He shook his head slowly. I do not have words for how ashamed I am. Earl studied the younger man for a long moment. The fury that should have been there, the righteous anger of being humiliated in front of hundreds of witnesses, was absent. In its place was something that surprised even Earl himself. Compassion. Captain, he said quietly, I have made mistakes that cost men their lives. Mistakes that haunt me every night. You made a mistake today that hurt my pride. His hand moved to touch the dog tags beneath his shirt. In the grand scheme of things, that does not rank very high. Ashworth's face contorted. How can you say that? After what I did? Because I have learned something in 71 years, Captain. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Earl's eyes moved to Celia, still gripping his arm. I wasted 4 years punishing myself for mistakes I made. Running from people who loved me because I did not think I deserved their love. He looked back at Ashworth. I am done punishing. I am done running. Life is too short and too precious to waste on anger. Ashworth stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. He had expected fury, expected condemnation, expected the public humiliation he deserved. Instead, he had received grace from a man he had treated with contempt. I do not deserve your forgiveness, he whispered. Earl shook his head. Forgiveness is not about deserving, Captain. It is about choosing. I choose to let this go. The question is whether you will learn from it. He gestured toward the crowd, toward the hundreds of faces watching their exchange. Every veteran you see on these streets, every man or woman who looks broken and lost, remember they might have carried a weight you will never understand. Do not judge by appearances. Do not assume. Just remember that you never know who you are talking to. Ashworth nodded slowly, wiping his face with trembling hands. I will remember. I swear I will remember. And we're done here, Captain. Earl turned back to Celia, his voice softening. I believe I have a granddaughter to meet. Celia's breath caught. She squeezed his arm tighter. Grace is with David. They're waiting at home. She paused, the word carrying weight. Home, Dad. You're home now, if you'll let it be. Earl looked at the memorial one last time. Cisco's name carved in granite, permanent and undeniable. He had come here to say goodbye to one brother. He had not expected to find his daughter waiting to bring him back to life. Cisco, he thought, you always did have a way of making things work out. He turned back to Celia and nodded. Take me home. Admiral Vance stepped forward. Master Chief, before you go. She extended her hand, and Earl shook it. There is a veteran reintegration program I would like to tell you about. Non-VA, run by former operators who understand what men like you have been through. No paperwork, no bureaucracy. Just support from people who have walked the same path. Earl hesitated. Admiral, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not sure I am ready for it. The program is not just for you. Vance interrupted gently. It is run by men who need purpose as much as the veterans they help. Men who have found that the best way to heal themselves is to help others. She paused. When you are ready, if you're ever ready, the door is open. Earl looked at Celia, who nodded encouragingly. He turned back to the Admiral. I will think about it, he said, and for the first time in 4 years, he meant it. The crowd had not dispersed. If anything, it had grown larger as word spread through the Fleet Week gathering about what was happening near the memorial. Phones continued to record from every angle. The story was already spreading across social media, fragments of video capturing the confrontation, the revelation, the reunion. Admiral Vance raised her hand, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. She stepped toward the podium that had been abandoned when the ceremony dissolved into something far more powerful than any planned program. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying across the assembly. What you have witnessed today was not part of our scheduled ceremony, but I believe it may be the most important thing any of us will see this year." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the sea of faces. This man, Master Chief Earl Whitmore, served this country for 24 years in ways that most of you will never know. His missions remain classified. His sacrifices remain hidden. But his service was real, and it was extraordinary. She turned to face Earl, who stood with Celia's hand still locked around his arm. "Master Chief Whitmore, call sign Spectre. I would like to read something into the record, if you will permit me." Earl hesitated, then nodded slowly. He had spent decades avoiding recognition, avoiding anything that might draw attention to the things he had done in the shadows. But today felt different. Today, with Cisco's name finally carved in stone and his daughter at his side, the shadows did not feel so necessary anymore. Vance pulled a paper from her aide's hand, a document that Senior Chief Reyes had printed from the declassified records database. "Master Chief Earl Vernon Whitmore, enlisted United States Navy, 1975. Completed basic underwater demolition SEAL training, Class 97. Assigned to SEAL Team 4. Subsequently selected for the Naval Special Warfare Development Group." The crowd listened in absolute silence as Vance continued. Decorations include the Navy Cross, awarded for extraordinary heroism during Operation Silent Harbor in Beirut, Lebanon, October 1986. 2 Silver Stars, awarded for gallantry in action during classified operations in Central America and the Middle East. Bronze Star with Valor Device. Purple Heart, 3 awards. And in 2015, following the declassification of certain operations, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, presented in a private ceremony at the White House. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor the nation could bestow, given to a man who had been living under a bridge. Vance was not finished. Among Master Chief Whitmore's documented actions, the extraction of 3 CIA operatives from a fortified Hezbollah compound in Beirut, during which he carried a wounded teammate under fire for 300 meters to the extraction point. His teammate, Petty Officer First Class Raymond Delgado, succumbed to his wounds during extraction. Earl's jaw tightened. Hearing Cisco's death reduced to official language, clinical and distant, felt wrong. But he said nothing. In December 1989, during Operation Just Cause in Panama, Master Chief Whitmore single-handedly held a defensive position for 19 hours, repelling multiple enemy assaults while providing cover for a pinned-down Army unit. His actions directly saved the lives of 17 American soldiers, including Lieutenant James Vance. The Admiral's voice caught slightly on her father's name. She steadied herself and continued. "These are only the operations that have been declassified. There are others, many others, that remain sealed. Actions taken in places that officially do not exist, against enemies whose names will never be spoken publicly. Master Chief Whitmore served in the shadows so that the rest of us could live in the light." She lowered the paper and looked directly at Earl. And today, this man, this legend, was publicly humiliated by an officer who judged him by his appearance, who saw a homeless veteran and assumed he was worthless, who demanded he remove a jacket that carries the blood of his fallen brother. The crowd's attention shifted to Captain Ashworth, who stood at the edge of the VIP section with his head bowed. The weight of 1,000 condemning gazes pressed down on him. Vance's voice hardened. "Let this be a lesson to every person here today. The men and women who serve this country do not stop being heroes when they take off their uniforms. They do not stop deserving our respect when they fall on hard times. And they certainly do not stop being worthy of dignity simply because they no longer look the part." She turned back to Earl. "Master Chief Whitmore, on behalf of the United States Navy, I apologize for the treatment you received today. It was inexcusable, and it will not be forgotten." Earl cleared his throat. The attention was overwhelming. Thousands of eyes focused on him, waiting for him to speak. Public speaking had never been part of his skill set. He had always preferred the shadows, the silence, the anonymity of operations where the only audience was the enemy. But Celia squeezed his arm, and he found his voice. "Admiral," he said, I appreciate the apology, but I did not come here for recognition or vindication. I came here to see my brother's name carved into that memorial." He gestured toward the granite slab, toward the letters that spelled Raymond C. Delgado. Cisco was the real hero. He gave his life so that I could complete the mission, so that 3 Americans could go home to their families. Everything I did after that day, I did because he could not. His voice grew stronger, the cold precision returning. I spent 40 years carrying his memory, carrying his dog tags, carrying the weight of surviving when he did not. And for the last 4 years, I carried something else. Shame, guilt, the belief that I did not deserve to live among the people I had fought to protect. He looked at Celia, tears streaming down his weathered face. I was wrong. I know that now. Surviving is not betraying the dead. Living is not a sin. And accepting help, accepting love, accepting the chance to come home, that is not weakness. He turned back to the crowd, to the sea of faces watching him with expressions ranging from awe to tears to something that looked almost like reverence. Every veteran you pass on the street has a story. Some of those stories are classified. Some of them are buried so deep that even the people who live them cannot speak about them. But every single one of those men and women deserves to be seen, deserves to be treated with dignity, deserves a chance to come home. His hand found Cisco's dog tags beneath his shirt, gripping them one final time. My brother told me to get them home. I spent 40 years honoring that promise for strangers. Earl looked at Celia, at the daughter he had abandoned, at the family he was about to reclaim. Today, I finally get to honor it for myself. The applause began slowly. A single pair of hands somewhere in the back of the crowd. Then another. Then a wave that built and crashed over the assembly like thunder rolling in from the harbor. 2,000 people on their feet, clapping, cheering, some weeping openly as they honored the man in the faded jacket who had given everything and asked for nothing. Earl stood motionless, overwhelmed by the response. He had spent 4 years becoming invisible, had learned to move through crowds without being seen, to exist in the margins where no one looked too closely. Now 2,000 pairs of eyes were fixed on him, and he had nowhere to hide. Celia leaned close, her voice cutting through the noise. "You deserve this, Dad. Let them thank you." Earl shook his head slowly. "I do not know how to do this." "You do not have to do anything. Just stand here. Let them see you. That is enough." The applause continued for nearly 2 minutes. When it finally subsided, Admiral Vance stepped forward again. "Master Chief Whitmore, there is one more matter to address." She gestured to her aide, who approached carrying a small velvet box. "Given the circumstances of today, I have taken the liberty of making a call to Washington. This is somewhat irregular, but I believe the situation warrants it." She opened the box, revealing a medal on a red, white, and blue ribbon. The Legion of Merit, awarded for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services. She looked up at Earl. "This was approved for you in 2018, following your retirement, but the ceremony was never held because we could not locate you. You had, as her daughter mentioned, disappeared." Earl stared at the medal. Another piece of hardware to add to a collection he had never displayed, never valued, never wanted. But this one was different. This one came with his daughter watching, with Cisco's name carved in stone behind him, with 2,000 witnesses who would remember this moment. "Admiral," he said quietly, "I do not need another medal." Vance smiled. "I know you do not need it, but sometimes recognition is not about what the recipient needs. It is about what the country needs. We need to acknowledge the men and women who serve in silence. We need to show the world that we remember, even when the missions are classified and the sacrifices are hidden." She held out the box. "Will you accept it? Not for yourself. For all the operators who never got to stand where you were standing." Earl hesitated. His eyes moved to Celia, who nodded encouragingly. Then to Frank Castellano, standing at the edge of the VIP section with tears streaming down his face. Then to Senior Chief Reyes, who had been the first to recognize what everyone else had missed. "For them," he said finally, "for the brothers who did not make it home." Vance pinned the medal to Earl's chest, just above the faded trident patch on his jacket. The crowd erupted again, another wave of applause that seemed to shake the very air. When the noise subsided, Admiral Vance turned to face Captain Ashworth. The younger officer had not moved from his position at the edge of the assembly. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow with the understanding of what his actions had cost him. "Captain Ashworth," Vance said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Step forward." Ashworth walked toward the Admiral on legs that seemed barely able to support him. He stopped at attention, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance, unable to meet anyone's gaze. "Captain Theodore Ashworth," Vance continued, "your conduct today demonstrated a fundamental failure of leadership and judgment. You publicly humiliated a decorated veteran based solely on his appearance. You accused him of stolen valor without any investigation. You attempted to have him forcibly removed from a ceremony honoring his own fallen brother." She paused, letting each word land like a hammer blow. "These actions are inconsistent with the values of the United States Navy and unbecoming of an officer." Ashworth's jaw trembled, but he remained at attention. "Yes, ma'am. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as Public Affairs Officer for Fleet Week San Diego. Your performance evaluation will reflect this incident in full, and you will be required to complete a comprehensive course on veteran affairs and homeless veteran outreach before any consideration of future assignments." She stepped closer, her voice dropping but still audible to those nearby. "Do you understand why this is happening, Captain?" Ashworth swallowed hard. "Because I judged a man by his appearance, and I was wrong." "No," Vance said. "Because you judged a man by his appearance, and you did not care if you were wrong. You did not ask questions. You did not investigate. You did not extend the basic courtesy of doubt to a fellow human being." She gestured toward Earl. "This man spent 24 years protecting people he would never meet, in places he could never talk about, for a country that would never know his name. And you treated him like garbage because he did not fit your image of what a hero should look like." Ashworth's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down his cheeks, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. "I know," he whispered. "I know what I did, and I will carry that shame for the rest of my life." From behind Vance, Earl spoke. "That is enough, Admiral." Both officers turned to look at him. Earl stepped forward, his gait steady despite the emotion of the moment. "Captain Ashworth made a mistake, a serious mistake, but destroying his career will not undo what happened, and it will not help anyone." He met the younger man's eyes. "I spent 4 years destroying myself over mistakes I made. I know where that road leads. It leads nowhere good." "Master Chief," Vance said carefully, with respect, "this is a matter of military discipline." Earl nodded. "I understand, and I am not saying there should be no consequences, but I am asking you to consider something." He gestured toward the crowd, toward the cameras still recording. "This moment is already going viral. The whole world is going to see what happened here today. Captain Ashworth's mistake and his apology are going to be watched by millions of people." He turned back to Ashworth. "That is a punishment far worse than any evaluation or reassignment. Living with what you did, knowing that everyone saw it, knowing that it will follow you forever, that is the consequence. What you do with that consequence, whether you let it destroy you or whether you let it make you better, that is up to you." Ashworth stared at him, disbelief warring with something that looked almost like hope. "After everything I did to you, you are defending me?" Earl shook his head. "I'm not defending what you did. I'm choosing not to let it define what I do." He placed a weathered hand on the captain's shoulder. "Learn from this. Be better. And maybe someday, help another veteran who does not look the part. That is how you make this right." 3 months later, Earl stood at the window of Celia's house in La Jolla, watching the sun rise over the Pacific. The ocean stretched to the horizon, endless and eternal, the same water that had shaped him during BUD/S all those decades ago. He had forgotten how beautiful it could be when you were not fighting to survive in it. The house was quiet. David had left early for the hospital, his surgical schedule packed with cases that would keep him busy until evening. Celia was still sleeping, exhausted from a double shift in the emergency room. And Grace, his granddaughter, would not wake for another hour, giving Earl this precious time alone with his thoughts and the sea. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. He barely recognized himself. 3 months of regular meals had filled out the hollows in his cheeks. A proper haircut had tamed the wild gray that had marked him as homeless. New clothes, simple but clean, had replaced the rags he had worn for years. He looked almost respectable now, almost normal, but the jacket still hung in the closet. Celia had wanted to throw it away, had argued that it was time to let go of the past. Earl had refused. The jacket was not just fabric and thread. It was memory. It was Cisco. It was every moment that had made him who he was, for better and for worse. They had compromised. The jacket stayed, preserved in a shadow box that Celia had commissioned from a local craftsman. The faded patches were visible through the glass. The trident, the coordinates, the initials RCD, the blood that had never washed out of the collar. All of it preserved, honored, but no longer carried as a burden. Earl touched the glass of the window, his fingers tracing the line of the horizon. He thought about the men still out there, the veterans sleeping under bridges and in doorways, carrying wounds that no one could see, fighting battles that never ended. He had been one of them. He understood the weight they carried, the shame that kept them from reaching out, the conviction that they did not deserve help. Admiral Vance's words echoed in his memory. The program is not just for you. It is run by men who need purpose as much as the veterans they help. He had called her 2 weeks after Fleet Week, had asked about the reintegration program she mentioned, had shown up at the first meeting expecting to receive help, and discovered instead that he had something to offer. The program was called Second Watch, run by retired operators who understood that the hardest battles often came after the uniform came off. No paperwork, no bureaucracy, just veterans helping veterans, one conversation at a time. Earl had started as a participant. Within a month, he was leading sessions. It turned out that 4 years on the streets had given him something no training could provide: credibility. When he sat across from a homeless veteran and said, "I know what you're going through," they believed him. When he told them that coming back was possible, they listened, because he was living proof. The bedroom door creaked behind him. Earl turned to see Grace padding across the living room in her pajamas, her dark hair tangled from sleep, her eyes still heavy with dreams. "Grandpa?" Her voice was soft, uncertain. "What are you doing?" Earl smiled. The expression still felt unfamiliar on his face, but it was getting easier. "Watching the sunrise, sweetheart. Want to watch with me?" Grace crossed the room and climbed onto the window seat beside him. She tucked herself under his arm with the easy trust of a child who had never known a reason to be afraid of him. Earl held her gently, marveling at the miracle of her existence, at the gift of being present for moments like this. "Grandpa," Grace said after a while, "Mommy told me you were lost for a long time, but now you are found." Earl's throat tightened. "That is right, sweetheart. I was lost, but your mommy found me." Grace nodded seriously. "I'm glad she found you. I like having a grandpa. I like being your grandpa," Earl said, "more than you will ever know." They watched the sun climb higher, painting the clouds in shades of gold and pink. Earl thought about Cisco, about Marilyn, about all the people he had lost, and all the years he had wasted. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but it no longer crushed him. It had become something he carried rather than something that carried him. Grace tugged at his sleeve. "Grandpa, will you tell me a story? About when you were a hero?" Earl looked down at her, at the innocence in her eyes, at the future she represented. He thought about all the stories he could tell, the operations, the battles, the moments of terror and triumph that had defined his career. But those were not the stories she needed to hear. "Let me tell you about a man named Cisco," he said. "He was my best friend, and he taught me the most important lesson I ever learned." "What lesson?" Earl smiled, pulling her closer. "That we do not quit. No matter how hard it gets, no matter how much we want to give up, we do not quit today. We quit tomorrow, but never today." Grace wrinkled her nose. "That does not make sense, Grandpa." "It will someday, sweetheart. It will. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible and that heroes walk among us in the most unexpected forms, please subscribe to our channel and share in the comments below. Who is the quiet hero in your life who deserves recognition? Sometimes the people who have given the most are the ones who ask for the least. Sometimes the greatest warriors are not the ones still in uniform. They're the ones who found their way home. Thank you for watching. The sun cleared the horizon, filling the room with light. Earl held his granddaughter and watched the new day begin. He thought about the second watch meeting he was leading that afternoon, about the 3 veterans he had helped find housing last month, about the letter he had received from Captain Ashworth, apologizing again and describing the homeless outreach program he had started on his new assignment. He thought about Cisco and Marilyn and all the years of running that had finally led him here. Still here, brother, he whispered, too soft for Grace to hear. Still trying. And this time, finally, I am home.